Hello and welcome to another episode of the Deccan Archive Explained. Today we are going to talk about a very dark chapter in Hyderabad's history, one filled with lamentations and torment, the great floods of Musi in the year 1908. Historically, Deccan has been described as a very dry region. We do not have perennial rivers that are fed with glaciers, which means that all our rivers are only active really only during the period of monsoon. That includes the two major rivers that flow through Telangana, Krishna and Godavari, as well as their tributaries. The largest tributary that flows through Telangana going into the river Krishna is the river Musi or Musa or what people also call as Muchkonda. Now, this small river or a tributary which goes from Vikarabad, that is towards the west of Hyderabad, all the way joining Krishna at Wazirabad, running over a course of some 240 to 270 kilometers, passes through Hyderabad just 70 kilometers after its emergence in the Anantagiri hills of Vikarabad. This river has been described by a lot of historians as a trickle or a mere stream in the summer, but a raging torrent, a raging river in the peak monsoon, which is September in the Deccan. It was on the banks of this very river that Muhammad Quli Qutub Shah built his city, Hyderabad. It was also this very river on which his father Ibrahim Quli built the very first stone bridge that is known as the Purana Pul. Now, after Purana Pul was built in the year 1578, the Britishers and the Nizam of Hyderabad eventually contributed in the building of three more bridges. The Musallamjang Bridge, which is now situated close to the City College, the Afzalganj Bridge, and the Oliphant Bridge, which is also known as the Chadar Ghat Bridge. These four bridges existed on the Musi River, connecting the north and the south of Hyderabad city until the 20th century. As it is typical of monsoon in the Deccan, even in September 1908, there were storms brewing in the Bay of Bengal. One such storm made its way all the way deep into Telangana and had deposited 27 inches of rain in the catchment areas of the Musi River and Hyderabad's lakes around 27 and 28 September 1908. All of this rain had accumulated and filled the reservoirs and lakes to their brim. Now, as the rains continued, these reservoirs and bunds could not take the load much longer. All of these lakes would be connected, meaning at the highest contour there would be a small lake which would then empty into a bigger lake, and then the chain would continue where the size of the lakes would grow bigger as they would approach the Musi River and then finally empty into it. Now, as soon as the first layer of the lakes were overflowing because of average maintenance, they could not withhold the pressure of water and the bunds breached. The, the, the breached bund and the debris that it carried with it, the water, eventually caused the breaching of the rest of the bunds in the downstream, leading to the river Musi, which swelled in size in a very quick time. Now, on the morning of 28th September 1908, while it was still dark, the sun was rising, but no one in Hyderabad could see the sunrise because it was raining so much from the past 24 hours that the river had now risen over the Purana Pul for almost 13 feet, and it had entered the localities of the old walled city as far as the Hussaini Alam, and on the north it had entered the Begum Mazar area, which is almost 2 kilometers from the river banks. It also swept away a significant portion of Afzalganj and the markets and the slums. It also washed away the portions of the Afzalganj hospital where there were patients admitted. It also washed away significant portions of the Victoria Zanana Hospital. It washed away pieces of buildings around the Salarjung's estate, which is the Diwan Devdi, and on the shores of Chadar Ghat on either north and south banks. This caused a loss of 15,000 lives within a span of a few hours. And one of the survivors of this massive flood, which the locals call as the Tohyani or the deluge, was Amjad Hyderabad. Amjad Hyderabadi lived around Afzalganj, and when the water in the river rose, which is right next to the precinct, the locality, he clung onto a very old tamarind tree and saved his life, along with several other people who climbed onto these trees and saved their own lives. But unfortunately, he had to witness his family get washed away in the floods. And after recovering from this incident, Amjad, who went on to become one of the greatest Hyderabadi poets ever, writes about this particular day. And he writes a poem called Khayamat-e Soghra, translating to the minor doomsday, that describes the calamity and what happened on this day to him personally. Now, there are several other narratives about what happened on 28th of September 1908. One of the most popular ones is the Nizam of Hyderabad, Mir Mehboob Ali Khan, after looking at the destruction of the river, which had entered so far ahead into his city, was asked by a Brahmin priest from the Champa Darwaza temple to go and offering to the river goddess so that the water subsides. And apparently, so the Nizam did. And as soon as the Nizam offered a thali with a gold sari, some jewelry, kumkum, and haldi onto it, to the river, as soon as the Nizam presented it, the water started receding. This was around 11 a.m. in the day, and the water starts receding but leaves a trail of destruction. We have a lot of photographs that document how much the city had been damaged, meaning the entire precincts that laid on sides of the riverbank, north and south, were completely washed away. And this was a very critical moment in the city's urban history. What this basically did to Hyderabad was the urban planners were hired by the Nizam, and this body was constituted, which went on to be called City Improvement Board or Araish Balda. Their duty was to ensure that no such calamity will now repeat in the future. They wanted to make the city flood proof, and they hired Mokshaginnam Visvesvaraya, who was the Dewan of Mysore previously and one of India's smartest engineers. Visvesvaraya was called to Hyderabad, and he went on a survey looking at all of the flood affected areas across Hyderabad and Sikandrabad, and he submitted a report to the Nizam. He had recommended a few things. The most important one was making embankments on the river Musi and its tributary EC. And upon this request, two reservoirs were eventually constructed. The first one was designed by Visvesvaraya himself, the Osman Sagar, and the second one on the river EC was built later on, called Himayat Sagar. Now, both of these reservoirs ensured that the water would not flood the city, and they also ensured that there was always drinking water available to the growing population of the city. The second suggestion that Visvesvaraya gave was to strengthen the river banks within the city, to remove the population away from the riverfront and put them far away in nicely built colonies, and make beautiful parks on the riverfront. This was what the second suggestion, that was making a modern riverfront. And the Nizam had followed his advice, and he built the Osmania Park that stretched from the entirety of Osmania General Hospital's bank to Chadar Ghat, and he built stately buildings on the riverfront, meaning the City College built in 1919, the High Court in 1919 again, the Osmania General Hospital roughly again 1923, and the Osmania library, the state library, 1930s. And eventually the scheme was followed, and they also built the Salarjung Museum at the very spot. Ada Khana Zahra was built on the same riverbank. All of the housing settlements were moved away from the river in case there might be another flood, and they were replaced with parks and public buildings and flood retaining walls. And the third suggestion that Visvesvaraya had given was to build stormwater drains for the city. And the old city of Hyderabad underwent a lot of construction in this period from 1908 till 1920s to 1930s, where massive stormwater drains were constructed and the water was directly drained into the river Musi. And these drains can still be seen as one crosses from the new city to the old city. And these drains are embedded right within the city wall. And because of these networks, the storm drain networks, even today, you do not have the old historic core of Hyderabad city flooding. So it was not just for the south part of the old city, but also to the north part. Now, the changes in policy actually improved life around the city and the riverfront and public spaces, but it also caused the nobles and the higher upper class to move away from the walls of the old city. This triggered a move of the royals and the nobles from the south to the north, which was much safer and lesser prone to floods. The Nizam of Hyderabad, whose administrative seat was the Chamuhalla or the Purani Haveli, had moved to King Koti. And so did the nobles, especially the Paigas who had abandoned their Shahganj palaces in the old city and moved to Begumpet, which was much, much more safer from flooding when compared to the old city. And so was eventually the formation of the localities, the plush localities of Banjara Hills and Jubilee Hills. Now, every year, people of Hyderabad remember the Toghyani, where so many lives were lost, but it also resulted in a significant watershed in the city's history, where the city was basically revamped for the future generations, made a future proof for at least 1 century. And people who are aware of this history gather at the old faithful tree at Osmania General Hospital, the old neem tree, where there is a board that talks about how 150 people clung onto this tree and saved their lives in the great Musi floods of 1908. Another advantage of the aftermath of the flood and the Nizam's will to reconstruct his city was the making of the moon maps. When Visvesvaraya had come to survey the lands and the flood affected areas, another engineer who worked in the Singareni collieries, whose name was Leonard Munn, was hired by the Nizam to create a detailed survey map of the entirety of the urban area of Hyderabad and also mark the flooded areas. This resulted in the creation of what we know as moon maps, which gives us an insight to how Hyderabad really was 100 years ago from now. And they also created something called the HFL markers. You can find a lot of these HFL markers across the Puranapal area, Karwan, the British Residency, Afzalganj, Aga Khana Zehra, and Chadar Ghat. These levels show the height of the maximum flood level, and there were several of them, but only a few of them survive now. So, if you have spotted these HFL markers anywhere across the city, do mention in the comments below. And see you in the next episode.